start off with prayer, taking the I out, but Charles did it for me right there. So I do want to welcome you this morning. It's good to have you here this morning to worship with us at Central. And for you, those of you who are catching the sermon online, we are glad that you're getting to join us in Word today as well. Like PT announced, that there is a Bible study that takes place between the two services. Hey, today would be a great day to go check that out and then stay for worship again, because as soon as worship's over, we're baptizing a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old. And I am excited about that. You wouldn't want to miss that. You know, I want to get started by looking at the book of Luke. Luke chapter 5, verse 26. Luke chapter 5, verse 26. This verse right here, it says, "Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, 'We have seen remarkable things today.'" Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, "We have seen remarkable things today." You know, every pastor or church wants that verse to be read after the morning service, don't they? Yeah, this verse comes when many of you remember the story when Jesus was in a house and he was teaching and people were crowding around, and these guys brought their buddy to be healed who was lame, and they couldn't get to him, so they lowered him down through a roof, and Jesus looks at him and says, "Your sins are forgiven." And the Pharisees and the religious leaders were like, no, what? No. You don't have the authority to do that. He said, "So you know I have the authority to do that. Rise, get up, and walk." And then this scripture, it says, everyone gave praise and they were filled with awe. We've seen remarkable things today. And I thought, what were they in awe of? Were they in awe of the fact that this man could now physically walk for the rest of his life, or the fact that he was going to walk in eternity? Because I believe it was about just the physical, probably. They may have not seen it. Today we got 3 young people, as I said, that are going to be baptized. Do you think people are going to look at that in awe of, oh man, these young people have turned in today's time to see Jesus? Or the fact that 1,000,000 years from now, those 3 siblings will be walking together in eternity? Are you in awe of that? I want to talk to you this morning about the awe factor of our spiritual lives. The awe factor. Vacation season's here. I'm hoping you're able to take your family on vacation. If you're from Kentucky, many times we either go one of 2 places. We either go down to Florida or where? Gatlinburg. Oh, we're going to go to Gatlinburg. And Ben, I remember when Ben was 3 years old, we took him to Gatlinburg for the first time, and he was just a toddler, so we wanted him to fall asleep, so we went late. We went about 8 o'clock at night and got there at almost midnight. And he slept the whole way like we planned, but it never quite goes like you planned, right? We drove that strip in Pigeon Forge for a long ways, and then we got to the hotel, and I looked back hoping to find this little boy asleep to carry him into the hotel room. But you know what? I looked back and found he was like, sitting up. And you know why? I thought, why is he so awake? And I thought, think about what he's just seen. He's just seen an ape climbing the tower. What's that? The Wax Museum. You know what I'm talking about? He has just seen these putt-putt courses with big dinosaurs, the Upside Down House, the Wonder Works, the big Titanic. He's seen people jumping off of platforms with rubber bands on their feet, right? He was in awe. He was captivated. You remember that when you drive there with your parents and you probably slept most of the way there, and then when you got to the strip, I remember me and Tim would hang our heads out the windows like a couple of, we would sit up. And we would watch because we were captivated. And here's the thing: if somebody asks you, what are you going to do in Gatlinburg? Oh, we're going to do Apple Barn, putt-putt, Alpine Slide, all the Outlet Mall, all these things that attract us. But what's the real awe factor of the Great Smoky Mountains? The Great Smoky Mountains. And how many people go spend their vacation there and spend their whole time on the strip, and they never go up into the mountains? Have you ever just sit on the back of the cabin and watch the morning sun come up with those mountains? There's something that doesn't just captivate you the way the stuff man makes, but it cultivates something in you, something that says, oh, there's something bigger than me out there, you see. But what man creates, he tries to captivate us. Melissa and I have built homes over the years to sell, and I've realized something. No matter how expensive a home you're building, put an awe factor in it. So that when a young couple walks through it to buy it, if you've got a TV hung somewhere or a nice fireplace over here or a big jacuzzi tub, you can spend that little extra money and they go, and they'll take pictures of it, and that's what they'll show their friends. Oh, look what this his house is got. But you go get a man from under, who's been living under the bridge, who is homeless, take him into that house. What's he going to say the awe factor is? What's going to captivate him? Is it going to be that big TV or the fact that he's dry? And that he can rest, and he can sleep, and he can get a shower. It's not going to captivate him. It's going to cultivate him into who he is. What about when you go to the ocean? I love the ocean, man. I love to get there early in the morning when it's like glass. I love in the middle of the day when the waves are rocking. My kids will get out on those little wave boards, and I've realized that I'm one of the only adults at the age of 40s that still get those little boards, you know. They'll ride in and say, Mom, look how far I come. And then I'll come behind them, Melissa, look how far I come. I love the beach. I love the ocean. But every time you go to Myrtle Beach, what do they got? They got Barefoot Landing. Panama City's got Pier Park. All these attractions up and down the strip, right? Every beach, every ocean has an aquarium at it. I never got that. People pay big money to go to the aquarium when you got the world's biggest aquarium right out in front of you. But we'll go to these strips and we'll sit up all amazed and do all this stuff, and then they'll go to the one awe factor at the ocean, which is what? The ocean. And we'll throw our towels out and we'll do this for hours. And then we'll do this for an hour. And then we'll get up. And say, boy, that all-you-can-eat buffet is about to open, right? And we'll sit back up. And I thought, you know what? So many people spend their time when they go to the majestic mountain of who God is and the vastness of his ocean, and they do it lying down. You know, we're in the middle of a series called The Secret. And that's about what we call today a quiet time, an alone time with God. You know what? My whole life changed when I began to practice the secret. My walk changed when I began to get intimate with God. I began to know things about him that other people didn't, thus the secret. And what we've been doing through this series is talking about secrets of the secret place. Things that I feel like God would have me share, just little simple things that helped me in quiet time, I know. And the first one, remember, like I said, they're simple. Remember, the first one was get up. The importance of giving him the first part of your day while your mind is fresh, while those, like when that mountain air is crisp or that ocean is glass. And not 15 minutes, but enough time to get in his word and pray. Don't let your alone time be your time in the shower or your ride to work listening to K-Love. Let's get so far past that. Get up. And then the next week we talked about gear up. Gear up. Do you have your Bible that's yours, that you highlight, that you mark in, your journal that you write in? Because we said if you don't go with something to write with, you weren't expecting to receive anything, right? Preparation reveals expectation. We talked about that. And I don't know if you're like me, but I have been guilty of getting up, set my alarm, get up, especially when I first started, and then gearing up, getting my Bible and my journal, and I would go to my living room, and I would get comfortable. I would get to a place where I felt good, and I would think, all right, God, this is when I go to you in prayer. God, let's go over some of that prayer list and let me get in a comfortable place where I can think straight. Now, right? And then your wife walks in. What are you doing? Oh, praying. I'm getting praying. And then I've gotten in the Word before, and I've thought, I'm going to get comfortable and get my blanket. I was always guilty of doing that. And I would get in and kind of like laying on that beach. All at once the angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and then you start falling asleep. Somebody walks in. What are you doing? Oh, I'm reading the Word. I'm in the Word. So the point this morning is as simple as the rest of them. The third point. You ready? Set up. Set up. Get your stuff in front of you. Get in a sitting position. Sit up. And you say, well, you're going to take up a sermon to tell me something as silly as sit up when I'm in my quiet time? Well, let me ask you something. Do you do it? Or do you do it when you're laying down in bed? Because here's the thing. You set up for what awes you. So let me ask you something, this church. What are you in awe of today? What are you in awe of? You know what that word means? It means a reverential respect mixed with fear and wonder. There's no reverential respect in the world today, is there? There's not. That's gone. And should we expect any different? Because it says Satan rules this world. Should we expect that from the world? No. But what about from the church? You see, the church is in an awful state today because they've lost their awe of who God is. They've been so consumed with being real to people. Oh, I want to be real to this person, that they've lost their reverence. I hear young people say all the time, I want something real. Older ones too. I just want God to do something real in my life. Well, how about sitting up every morning like He's really there? Like He's a real person. So many, oh, He's my best friend, though. He's my father. I can lounge. When my best friend comes over, I don't lay down on my face. I sit up and acknowledge him. When my father comes to visit with me, I am excited that he's there just to sit and talk. I don't lay down when I'm in his presence. You see, posture acknowledges presence. Hebrews 12:28 says this, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful. And so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Worship God acceptably. Worship is what we're called to do. This is acceptable worship, to be in awe of Him. I saw my little girl try on a dress the other day. We're going to have family pictures this week, and I thought to myself, man, she's growing up. Before long, there's going to be a young man comes and sits on that couch. I ain't going to like it. But what if he comes over and he sits the way I've seen a lot of young men sit? Say he's just sitting there like that the whole time that my young daughter is with him, and the whole time that I'm sitting there with him. You know what I'm going to begin to think? I'm going to begin to think he thinks his presence is blessing us rather than her presence blessing him. I'm going to think that he thinks he's doing us a favor by being there rather than in awe of my, and I won't accept it. I won't accept that. No, when she comes in the room, I want him to sit up. I want him to tell her that she looks nice. Let me tell you something. We always talk about accepting Christ. What about your worship? Is it acceptable? Is it done out of reverent fear this morning? So many people's quiet times get old very quick, and it fades very quickly. You know, the Outlet Mall in Pigeon Forge, it's fun for a day, but it'll get old. The Apple Barn's good for one day, but if you eat it every day, it'll get old. But the mountains, they never get old. The ocean, it never gets old. You see, so many people's quiet times fade because they're looking for an awe factor that will captivate them rather than looking at the awesomeness of who God is, that will cultivate them. You know, as I thought this morning, God, where would you have us go? I knew I just wanted to talk about Him. And I felt Him leading to Psalm 93. And as I've read that has become one of my favorite Psalms. You know, many of the Psalms talk about us, what God does for us and His relationship to us. You know, Psalm 23rd Psalm, our favorite, right? The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down. Psalm 93 is one of the few we're not mentioned at all. It's all about Him. So what I want us to do is just read this and talk about the awesomeness of God this morning and why He's worthy to set up when you come to His presence. Psalm 93, 1 through 5. It says this, the Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty and is armed with strength. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. Your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. The seas have lifted up, O Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves. Mightier than the thunder of the great waters. Mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Your statutes stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days, O Lord. There's no mention of us at all. In verse 1, it says, the Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. The Lord reigns. That means he's a king. You know, it says his majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty. I thought about that song, Majesty. You remember that, Majesty? Worship his majesty. When I hear those words, his majesty, you know what I think about? I think about the royal family in England. How many people are so captivated by them? Stand outside their wedding and their births and cry and carry on. What about Princess Diana? She just captivated the world. People were in awe, wanted to know every detail. Why? Because she was so poised in how she handled herself with the paparazzi most of the time. And she walked with class, and she was very pretty, and she cared about her people, and she would visit third world countries and care about them. What about Mother Teresa? She didn't just visit those countries. She lived there. She didn't shoo away paparazzi. She shooed away the flies off of lepers. She wasn't very poised. She was kind of humped over. But at that prayer breakfast where she called the nation out on abortion, she was very poised. She was poised another way in heart. But you don't see all these documentaries. Which one would you watch? Because she wasn't captivating, but she was cultivated. Robed himself in majesty. You know, when I was in high school, I robed myself in boots and jeans and a John Deere hat because that meant I was country. The athletes, they would robe themselves in Nikes and gym shorts, and it said something about who they were. And so I thought, Jesus says, God's robed in majesty. What did his attire look like? And I thought about the scripture in John 13:4 that says this. So he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing. He took off his robe. And he wrapped a towel around his waist. And he began to wash the feet of those slouched, of those reclining at the table. He washed their feet. The fact that he took his robe off and he takes a towel. And I've thought about all the towels that I've seen laying around on the ground in Guatemala where people are barefoot and the streets are dirt and all that, and you know how dirty those are. And that's the towel he puts on himself. And he begins to wash my feet every morning as I sit up, enabling me to walk in eternity. Do you realize how awesome that is? And because he washed their feet, it says God put everything under his in Ephesians. Majesty. Everything under him. Strength. It says he's armed with strength. I took a college guy to play golf the other day. Plays for Georgetown College, and his arms are big, and I was talking smack, and I told him, I said, watch this drive. You know, I got up there, and I hit it as hard as I could, and it went as long as I could, and I was proud of it. And then he stepped up there, and he hit it as hard as he could and as long as he could. Wow. He drove the green at Longview on number 1. If any of you know anything about that, he drove the green. And Ben and I just stood in awe and watched how he drove the distance, how he went the distance because of his big arms. And you know what? We are captivated by that. We're captivated by physical strength, by muscles, aren't we? The Rock, Van Diesel, we lift them up on TV. But Jesus' strength, how did we lift him up? On a cross. You see, his strength was to go the distance, but a distance that we can't fathom, that we can't even make, because in our lives today, we think the distance is just living to a ripe old age and being healthy throughout it and having a couple of kids and a good job. Oh, he's lived he's went the distance. But that is so minute compared to reality. And Jesus' strength was not about how hard he could strike something. It was about how hard he could be struck. You see, Jesus' strength is not about power. It's about how much you can endure. I heard a story the other day about a young man who received the Lord over in the Middle East by the name of Iran. This happened not long ago. And when he came to know the Lord, his friends turned on him and told his family, and his cousins began to mistreat him. Finally, they led him to like a 3 or 4 story building, it said, where they pushed him off and killed him. And I thought, as he sat up and looked over the edge of that building, the awe that he had to have, the reverential fear of God, to not deny him, looking death in its face, to be able to endure that blow as he sat up. And I thought about what we have to endure as Christians in our world today. And all I'm saying this morning is, are we willing to sit up on the couch and acknowledge who he is? And the reason that Uriah was able to do that is because he knew he wasn't established here. He was established in eternity. You see, Uriah had a different sense than the rest of those guys. He had a different sense than many of us here today. He had a sense of always. You see, when we sit up, it heightens our senses, doesn't it? It makes us more alert. And one of the senses that it gets is a sense of always. It says in verse 2, your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. Uriah knew that he wasn't just established here. You know, I saw a documentary about Mike Tyson the other day. He established himself as a fighter, and he could go the distance. That's what he was known for. But that eventually wore off to where he couldn't. Time caught up with him. You know, that royal monarchy, someday time will catch up with them, and they won't have that influence. You know, a lot of us will put established on church buildings or established in our home, Glenn family, established this date or whatever. But you know what? That's why it says till death do us part. There'll be one day that won't be anymore. Young lovers are right forever, always. But time will catch up with them. You know what I love? When you look up what the word eternity means, it says right here that God is from all eternity. I'm from Georgetown, established 1784. There's a start date, but there'll be an end date when it's all rolled up. But it says God's in from eternity. And when you look eternity up, it says this, where time has no application. Where time has no application. Let me tell you, in a world where everything's constantly changing, when technology is here today, gone tomorrow, as soon as we catch up with something, everything's in and out, man, a sense of always is awesome. To have that. To know that 1,000,000 years from now, I'll be more on charge than ever. A sense of always. And then in verse 4 it says this, mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. You hear the same word, mighty, 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 3 times. The word mighty means an expression of power, especially on the size of its vastness. I talked to a young man the other day who just got back from the Grand Canyon, and he described its vastness. And I thought so many times people will say, oh, in quiet time, I just wander. My mind just begins to wander. Well, let me tell you something. The more that you are in wonder, the less you'll wander. You think while he stood at the Grand Canyon, he was over here going, oh, I got to do this and I got to do this, and his mind was just rambling? No, he was staring at the vastness of it. And it compares God to the ocean. The seas have lifted up. You know, the ocean covers, many of you know this, 70% of the earth's surface. Less than 5% of the ocean has been explored. That's why something's new every day. The world's longest mountain chain is underwater. Most species have never been discovered, yet in Psalms, in verse 3, it says the oceans lift their voice to him. His vastness. The ocean is a mighty thing. You know, it makes up 70% of our oxygen. It's very critical to life. But let me tell you something. It will pummel anything in its way when it rages. And nobody is more alert to the ways of the ocean than those who live by it. Nobody's more alert than those who live right by of the waves when they begin to rage, or the tide when it comes in, or the storms that are brewing, than the ones who are living close to it, who are so in awe of it they move right next to it to be able to see it every day. You see, when you begin to sit up and notice the vastness of God and the might of God, and you begin to contemplate it and physically make yourself sit up to begin to see it and recognize, you know what it does? It makes you more alert. It heightens your sense of alertness to what He's doing in your life, when to move, when not to move. Are you quick to notice the ways of God? Think about how so many, when Jesus were, some of the ways God's moved through the years, even in the Bible, how so many were quick to miss what He was doing because of the way He does things. Saul, he was almost quick to miss that David was going to kill that giant, save the nation. Philip, when Andrew brought the little boy with the loaves, he was quick to miss how God was going to feed all those people. And how many have been quick to miss. They were thinking the Messiah was going to come, this conquering warrior, rather than a carpenter. They thought He was going to conquer Rome rather than die a criminal's death. It's easy to miss if you're not living close to the ocean. Do you remember Eutychus? The young man that while Paul was preaching, perhaps you feel like that this morning, it says his preaching went on and on. Eutychus began to sink as he was sitting on a windowsill. He began to slouch, and what happened? He fell to his death. Wonder what would have happened if he'd have sat up. Euron, who was a believer, Eutychus, who was a believer, one fell because he was enduring, and the other fell because he was slouched. What if he'd have sat up? You know, many of us are alert to the stock market and what it's doing. We got these little things on our phone that ding and tell us when it's moving. We've got alerts for texts and emails and phone calls. And I was with somebody the other day, and it started raining, and his phone dinged, and he said, "Oh, it's raining." I said, "You think?" But there is no alert on your phone for what God's doing. No, you got to take time away from that and sit up. You know, Anna Kate come down the stairs the other day. As you know, we baptized her last week. And I thought, she came down the stairs a few days before, and she opened up about God and began talking about that. What if I'd have been about my agenda? What if I'd not been walking? I would have missed her hunger. How many people have had opportunities, people around them in their lives, their family and their friends, they've missed them because they weren't alert to what God was doing and the Spirit moving. Many of us have been walking with God a long time, and we miss what He's done in our lives because we lay down. I remember being in my Firebird one time in high school, and I ran into some floodwaters, and it began carrying me away. Guess who was alert to that? Who knew it right away? Me. Because I was sitting up. If I'd been laying in the back seat, I wouldn't have had no idea what was going on. I run into so many people who allow sin in their life. They've been walking with the Lord, and they're like, it sweeps them away, and you're like, how could you let that happen? You weren't alert to it. And when you're not alert, you become unaware of the situation you're in. You think about somebody you've seen them on the beach. They ride that flow to sleep too long. Even on a calm day, the ocean will take you away. And you become unaware of where you're at. So many people today are unaware of the situation that they're in. So many people are eager to post and make comments about situations they're completely unaware about. And when I say that, I don't mean physically, I mean spiritually. You know what they're unaware of? His holiness. Verse 5 says this, your statutes stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days. When you begin to sit up and take note of that there is no one else like God, that's what holiness means, that He is set apart. There is none like Him. And you can say, well, there's none like the devil. He's set apart in evil. Yeah, but that's evil. God is holy. He's right. And he's above all. And when you begin to, folks, you know what it does? It causes you to be aware of the situation that you're in. So many people don't recognize the gravity of their sin because they don't recognize the gravity of God's holiness and who He is. I heard a story the other day about a prisoner talking about he was in prison for theft. And he was talking about somebody else who was in prison for theft. And this guy had hurt somebody, and he was saying, yeah, see, he's such a bad person. They said, you're in there for the same thing, but he was comparing himself to someone else rather than to the law. And that's the way so many of us live our lives. You know, it says holiness adorns your house. You know what that means? It beautifies it. So many people, so many of us don't see holiness as beauty, but as a burden. A wall that we got to climb rather than a way in which we walk. Because you see, His holiness is what's cultivated in us. 1 Peter 1:15-17 in closing says this, but just as He who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. You live out your time in reverent fear. You see, you don't conquer holiness. Holiness conquers you. You'll either submit and surrender to it now, or you will one day when time catches up with you. You surrender to it. You know, General Booth of the Salvation Army, one of the most powerful ministries throughout the years, said this, if there is any power in the Salvation Army today, it's because God had all the adoration of my heart, the power of my will, the influence of my life. You see, the greatness of a man's power is in the measure of his surrender. And you see, a person surrenders, an army surrenders when they realize they're in the presence of something greater than they are. Just like those mountains. You know, a lot of people say the church is laid down. The church in America is laid down. And I thought about those disciples when Jesus found them. When He come back from the garden, they were laying sleeping. And a lot of people say that's the way He's going to find us when He comes back. Man, He's going to find us asleep. What would have happened if they'd have been intentional about sitting up and stayed alert? Because I believe the man who, in the quietness of his house, will set up and physically acknowledge the holiness, the might, the strength of who our God is, will be upright in heart. Would you stand with me this morning? You know, we said that the power comes from surrender. Maybe you're here and you haven't surrendered to Him. You've never surrendered your life to Christ. Man, we would love for you to do that today. James is going to lead us in How Great Thou Art. Because we didn't plan that, but I said, man, what a perfect song for the message today, to sing about the awesomeness of God. But if you're here this morning, you would like to kneel and surrender before that God today, you feel free to do that as we worship. You come to the altars. There's going to be prayer counselors at each side exit door who would love to pray with you about anything. Maybe you just need somebody to talk to. After the service, I'll be over here in room 10. Maybe you'd like to express it. You'd like to be baptized. We're going to baptize those guys today. that you've made that turn. But this morning, let's worship him in reverent fear as James leads us.
Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. When Christ shall come with a shout of acclamation and take me home, what joy shall fill my heart. Then I shall bow in humble adoration and there proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou